It is Tuesday, November 20th, 2012. We're live in the Wall Street Journal newsroom in New York. Today on WSJ Lunch Break, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is traveling to the Middle East to try and diffuse escalating Israeli-Palestinian tensions. We're going right now to Jerry Seib. He is in Washington, D.C. for us. Jerry, thanks for being here. Now, we're seeing reports that Hamas is saying there has been a ceasefire. At the same time, Israel reports are saying, is still saying that negotiations are ongoing and denying that there has been a ceasefire. This is still sorting itself out. But let's talk about Hillary Clinton going to the Middle East now. What's behind the timing of this, and what does she hope to accomplish?
Well, there's two things. There's a short-term issue of getting a ceasefire in place now, stopping the hostilities at the moment. And it sounds as if the two sides, that is to say Israel and the Hamas leadership in Gaza, are getting close to that. Egypt's brokering that deal. It may be that Hillary Clinton's presence may help seal that deal. But, you know, most of these Middle Eastern ceasefires tend to be a little shaky at first. And so there's a longer-term question of how do you reduce the tensions over time. And that's going to require some tricky diplomacy. And that's what I assume Hillary Clinton is really about here. You know, one of the problems with sending a U.S. Secretary of State into a situation like this is that the American presence tends to freeze the actions on other fronts. People say, oh, well, you know, the U.S. is here, they'll take care of this. And it can stop the process of negotiating between the parties themselves because everybody waits for Washington to fix it. Yeah. So it'll be tricky. It'll be a tricky mission.
Jerry, refresh us on what caused these tensions to resurface and the violence to escalate starting last week.
Well, there has been some concern in Israel over the last several weeks about what seems to be some splinter Palestinian groups popping off rockets into Israel. And the problem seems to be that Hamas, the leadership in Gaza, didn't really start that process, but let these other groups carry that forward. Tensions got higher, and at some point the Israelis decided enough is enough. We can't really put up with this, so they struck back. Once they struck back, the escalation began. Hamas got involved, and Hamas started using longer-term rockets, of which it has some, not a whole lot, probably acquired from Iran. And that stepped up the whole level of violence. So now the task is to move it back below that and to get serious conversations underway about what it is the Palestinians really want here, which is some relief on the blockade of Gaza.
Okay. And some international security experts saying that the most important talks may go on in Egypt. Why is that?
Well, I think the central character in this whole drama in some ways is not the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu or anybody in the Hamas leadership, but Mohammed Morsi, who's the new Egyptian president. He's a Muslim Brotherhood figure. He's made a point of embracing Hamas when this all started. And so the question is, can he play a responsible role here? On the one hand, he's got better relations with Hamas than Hosni Mubarak, his predecessor, did because he's of the Islamist movement. On the other hand, the U.S. is looking for some sign that an Islamic leader, an Islamist leader in the Middle East and in Cairo can play a responsible role here and serve as a broker between the more radical forces and Israel and the West. That's the test for Mohammed Morsi. He's the interlocutor for Hamas. He's the guy on the hot seat.
And Jerry, how much of all this is complicated by leaders of the Arab world calling to deliver more missiles to the Palestinian resistance in Gaza?
Well, you know, that's kind of standard conversation. You know, I think the real test, and this goes back to Egypt again, is will Egypt stop the delivery of those kinds of things? Because almost all that equipment, one way or the other, has to come to Gaza through the Sinai Peninsula, which Egypt controls, you know, alongside the Gaza Strip. And the Egyptians made a show last week of saying we stopped some military shipments from going through there. And that's what the West and the U.S. is going to be looking for from Egypt. Will you stop the flow of weapons into Gaza or not?
All right, Jerry Seib in Washington, thanks for bringing